Okay. Before we start recording this section, we probably need to acknowledge something.
You mean the digital asset issue?
Yes. Because that's not a normal probate problem.
It's also not something most families expect to encounter.
Especially when the asset involved can be worth six figures.
And the transaction itself may only appear as a single line on an exchange record.
But that line could represent a transfer onto the blockchain.
Which means the trail might exist. But it's not obvious.
And once a cryptocurrency transaction is confirmed, it can't simply be reversed like a credit card charge.
Which makes the question of where the asset went extremely important.
Alright. Let's explain how investigators actually approach something like this. Before we go further, it helps to understand why digital assets are treated differently in estate cases. This part of the series looks at a topic that didn't even exist in probate law a couple of decades ago. How digital assets, especially cryptocurrency, can appear inside estate investigations, and how investigators attempt to trace where those assets may have moved. Let's begin with the reality many families are now facing in probate.
Estates today often include assets that never existed in traditional probate law.
Cryptocurrency, digital accounts, online exchanges, and self-custody wallets.
Unlike a bank account, these assets may not appear on ordinary financial statements.
Which means families sometimes discover them only after something unusual happens.
For example, a withdrawal from a cryptocurrency exchange.
Or funds moving from a regulated platform into an external wallet.
When that happens, families often ask a simple question.
Where did the digital asset actually go?
In most investigations, there are only a few realistic explanations.
The transfer may have been intentional and legitimate.
It may have been influenced by an outside scam.
Or in some cases, the transfer may involve pressure or coercion from someone close to the account holder.
Digital assets make these questions harder to answer than traditional financial transfers.
Because the transaction itself may occur on a public blockchain rather than inside a bank.
Which means investigators often combine two very different sources of information.
Records from the exchange where the account was held.
And the public record of transactions stored on the blockchain.
Together, those records can often reconstruct what actually happened.
Even when the transfer initially appears mysterious.
But the investigation usually begins with the exchange itself.
Because that's where the digital paper trail often starts.
And that trail can reveal much more than most people expect.
Including account access history and transaction metadata.
Which is exactly where most digital asset investigations begin. Once a digital asset transfer is discovered, the investigation usually begins with a simple question.
Was the transfer intentional? Or was something else happening behind the scenes?
Investigators generally evaluate three possible explanations.
The first possibility is that the transfer was legitimate.
Many cryptocurrency owners move funds into self-custody wallets.
Sometimes to improve security.
Sometimes to hold assets privately outside centralized exchanges.
And sometimes as a gift or transfer to another individual.
But legitimate transfers are only one possible explanation.
The second scenario involves external fraud.
In recent years, cryptocurrency scams targeting older individuals have become increasingly common.
Some involve impersonation.
Others involve fake investment platforms promising extraordinary returns.
In those cases, victims are often persuaded to withdraw assets from legitimate exchanges.
And send them to addresses controlled by scammers.
The third possibility involves internal coercion.
This occurs when someone close to the account holder influences the transfer.
Sometimes through emotional pressure.
Sometimes through direct control of devices or account credentials.
Each scenario leaves a different pattern of evidence.
Which is why investigators focus first on the digital record.
Because the records often reveal how the account was accessed.
And who may have been involved in the transaction.
Which brings us to the next step in a digital asset investigation.
The records held by the exchange where the account was created. At this stage of the investigation, attention usually turns to the exchange itself.
Platforms like Coinbase operate as regulated financial institutions.
Which means they maintain extensive records about their users and transactions.
Those records can become critical evidence in probate investigations.
Especially when the question involves a specific withdrawal or transfer.
Through legal process, investigators can request a production package from the exchange.
That package typically includes identity verification records,
such as government identification used during account registration.
It can also include access logs, showing when the account was opened or used.
Those logs may contain IP addresses and device identifiers,
which can sometimes reveal where the account was accessed from.
Another important category is transaction history.
This includes timestamps, asset quantities, and transaction identifiers.
Sometimes even notes describing asset conversions.
These records allow investigators to reconstruct the movement of funds.
From the moment the asset was purchased,
through the moment it was withdrawn from the exchange.
But the exchange records only show part of the story.
Because once the funds leave the exchange,
the transaction continues on the blockchain.
Which brings investigators to the next stage of analysis.
Following the transaction through the public ledger itself. Once the funds leave the exchange, investigators shift their attention to the blockchain.
Unlike traditional banking systems, many cryptocurrency networks use a public ledger.
This ledger records every transaction ever made on the network.
Which means investigators can often follow the movement of funds step by step.
The investigation usually begins with a transaction identifier,
sometimes called a transaction hash or hash ID.
This functions like a digital receipt for the transfer.
Using that identifier, investigators can look up the transaction on a blockchain explorer,
which reveals the sending address and the receiving address.
From there, investigators can follow the funds forward across the network,
sometimes through several intermediate wallets,
and eventually to another exchange or storage wallet.
Modern forensic tools help visualize this entire path.
These tools can map complex networks of transactions
and group addresses that appear to belong to the same entity.
But there is an important limitation to remember.
The blockchain shows wallet addresses, not names.
Which means investigators often know where funds moved,
but not immediately who controlled those addresses.
Which is why exchange records and blockchain analysis must be combined.
Together, they can sometimes reveal the identity behind a transaction.
Which leads to the next question investigators must consider.
What can realistically be recovered?
And what outcomes families should realistically expect?
At this point in the investigation, families often ask a practical question.
What are the realistic outcomes of tracing a digital asset transfer?
In practice, most investigations fall into three general categories.
The best case is full identification and recovery of the asset.
This can occur when funds arrive at another regulated exchange,
because those exchanges may also hold identity records,
which allows investigators to connect the wallet to a real person.
If the assets remain accessible, courts may order them frozen or returned.
The second outcome involves attribution without recovery.
This occurs when investigators can identify where the funds went,
but the assets themselves cannot realistically be recovered.
Sometimes because the funds moved through many intermediate wallets,
or into jurisdictions where enforcement becomes difficult.
Even in those cases, the investigation can still establish what happened.
which can be important for probate disputes or elder exploitation claims.
The final outcome occurs when the trail effectively ends.
This can happen when assets are moved into privacy-focused systems,
or into wallets that never interact with regulated exchanges again.
In those cases, the blockchain still shows the movement of funds.
but the identity behind the transaction may remain unknown.
Understanding these outcomes helps families evaluate their next step.
Because digital asset investigations can require time and resources.
Which is why the final step is often a strategic decision.
How far the estate should pursue the investigation.
Which brings us to the strategic roadmap for cases like this. So, how do estates actually move forward when a digital asset transfer raises questions?
Most investigations follow a structured sequence of steps.
The first priority is preservation of evidence.
This often begins with securing the decedent's devices,
such as phones, computers, or hardware wallets.
The second step involves obtaining records from the exchange,
usually through a formal legal request or subpoena.
Those records can reveal account activity and access history.
The next stage is blockchain tracing,
where investigators follow the transaction through the public ledger,
mapping how the funds moved across wallets and networks.
Sometimes identifying where the funds eventually arrived,
if the destination involves another regulated exchange.
Courts may be able to compel further disclosure,
which can lead to identification of the recipient,
and potentially recovery of the assets.
even when recovery is not possible.
The investigation can still establish a clear factual record,
which may resolve disputes within the estate,
or provide evidence for legal action if wrongdoing occurred.
Ultimately, digital asset investigations combine technology and law,
public ledgers and financial records,
digital forensics and traditional legal process,
and careful analysis of the evidence that remains.
Because even in the digital age, probate still comes down to facts.